Ministry called on all citizens to stay at home. South Africa's international relations expert, Professor Bheki Mngomezulu, says he is concerned for President Cyril Ramaphosa ahead of his meeting with his United States counterpart Donald Trump. Mngomezulu, a professor in international relations at the Nelson Mandela University, was responding to President Trump's confirmation that he will be meeting with the SA delegation led by President Ramaphosa next week. Yesterday, Trump's administration welcomed 49 South Africans that were granted a refugee status in the U.S., putting them to be victims of racial discrimination and genocide. This has been dismissed by the South African government as misinformation. Professor Mngomezulu says Ramaphosa should stand his ground as Trump is expected to be armed with lots of false information.
And in our own context, our president was quick to respond to issues that pertain to the American politics, where the President of America had made comments in the media. If our president doesn't contain himself, we might see a worse situation than we saw when President Trump hosted President Zelensky. So therefore, I would maybe suggest that the advisors of the president and the president himself goes having well prepared himself for any eventuality, because President Trump has a way of making sure that he ridicules his counterparts from other countries.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has meanwhile concluded his working visit to Côte d'Ivoire. Ramaphosa used the visit as an opportunity to consolidate existing bilateral relations between the two countries. He held a bilateral meeting with his counterpart President Alassane Ouattara to discuss matters of mutual interest. The two leaders committed to strengthening bilateral ties and to increase trade between their countries. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have put the death toll at more than 130 following torrential rains that triggered flash floods and landslides in South Kivu province. The government of the DRC is having challenges confirming the exact numbers of the tragedy. There are fears that the numbers could rise as many people are also missing. The village of Bushushu in the Kahele territory was one of the hardest hit, with homes, schools and farmlands washed away in an instant. DRC-based journalist Jamie Shunkrani says relief efforts are facing great difficulty.
This morning, I talked with the civil society there. He told me that in that number which I processed here behalf, there is 50 men, and all men of them are women and children. So it means the government until now have difficulty of recovering some basic necessity of the victim, because there are many people was injured, and the violence can go just on high when you're trying to see what is the official are saying right now.
Lastly, the head of the main UN agency for Palestinians, Philip Lazzarini, has told the BBC that Israel's blockade of food deliveries to Gaza constitutes a war crime. Lazzarini says the Israeli government had weaponized food by barring supplies for more than 2 months.
By any account, the number of people who have been killed is huge and certainly underestimated. We have seen the systematic destruction also of a school, of health center. So there is absolutely no doubt that we are talking about massive atrocities.
Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Ntsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Novak Djokovic as well as Andy Murray split after 6 months of working together, and Carlo Ancelotti to leave Real Madrid and take over the Brazilian men's national football teams. Details at 12:30.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Well, thank you to Sibudi Makuro with our sports headlines and Onelen Zinzi with our news update. It is 12:07 Central African time and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa on DSTV's audio bouquet channel 802, OpenView channel 628 and on www.channelafrica.co.za as well as on the SABC Plus app available on the Apple and Google Play stores. And join us in conversation on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1, on Facebook at Channel Africa. You can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763, that's 406-9126, hashtag Africa Updates, and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +2711 714 4459.
We are on OpenView's audio bouquet. Channel 628. Africa Update on Channel Africa.
South African civil rights organization AfriForum says they have nothing to do with the decision by the 49 white Afrikaners to accept U.S. President Donald Trump's offer for refugee status in the United States. And to speak to us further, we are joined on the line by AfriForum CEO Kale Kriel. Kale, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon to you, Lulu. It's great speaking to you.
Kale, you say the departure of the 49, South Africans Afrikaners is as a result of the government. Elaborate on this.
Yes, I think it's an indictment on the government. What we've seen over the last few years is a continued use of a chant calling for the killing of Afrikaners and farmers, the Kill the Boer chant. And of course, we know that Julius Malema is the leader of a much smaller party. But I think the worrying issue here is that we have the government in the country, as well as President Ramaphosa, refusing to condemn that chant. And then the situation is worsened, where Afrikaners also felt that the Constitution and Constitutional Court will respect their dignity and also their right to life, but the court also then legalized this chant. And I think in that sense, many people amongst the Afrikaner community feel threatened. And I think amongst there are, of course, also other reasons. But I think this plays a major role in some people saying they would rather than leave the country as refugees, and that's a very sad situation for us. People leaving the country of their birth. We believe the future of Afrikaners are in Africa and on the southern tip of Africa, and that is why we are fighting these issues. We want to make sure that people can stay. So it's unfortunate that what we are seeing, it's tragic. And it actually sends a clear message to us and also to government that we need to solve what is happening in South Africa so that this is not necessary for people.
Now, Kale, are you not going to take some responsibility with these people leaving South Africa, these particular Afrikaners, and the next group that is set to be leaving soon, with regards to your trip to the United States and your mission in terms of giving the President of the United States a picture of what, or allowing him to interpret what you stated to him is happening in South Africa and misinterpreted, as you've been saying? Will you not take responsibility for that and, work within the country and work with government and South Africans to ensure that what South Africa is about is not misrepresented?
Yes, maybe I can just state that the first statement of President Trump was on the 3rd of February, and his executive order was then given a few days later, if I remember correctly, the 8th of February. We only went to the U.S. at the end of February. So this granting of refugee status to Afrikaners happened a few weeks before we went to the U.S. But I must say, the U.S., of course, has a State Department. They've got an embassy, and they are well informed of what is happening in South Africa. When we went to Washington, we were astounded by how well informed people are. And we never misrepresented anything about South Africa. People that say that, when we ask them what did we misrepresent, they can't tell us, or if they tell us, then it's wrong. For instance, the white genocide issue, over the last few months, we had more than 5 media institutions that had to apologize to us because they misrepresented our position. What we have said, we are worried about farm murders. There's a lot of torture going on. There's a call for these murders. We said we are worried about disrespect for other human rights in terms of the Bella Act attacking our cultural resistance because it targets Afrikaans schools. And all those things we put on the table, and it is an effort to find a solution. Denialism by government of these problems won't solve them. We need to say clearly what are the real problems and how can we solve it in the interest of all people in South Africa, and in the end also of the continent. We need to make sure that the economy grows, and therefore we cannot just be quiet when government goes about implementing irresponsible policies.
Okay, so you going to the US at the end of February after the executive order had already been issued by President Donald Trump, did you then correct them on their whatever information they have with regards to information they're getting through their embassies, as you say? Did you correct them in this, with regards to what he believes is happening in South Africa?
Well, the fact is, I think in terms of the wording, we would use different wording, but the fact is farm murders is a real problem. We are seeing child kill the boer. We are seeing that nobody condemns this. We are seeing tortures going on with regard to that. So the way to say, if we don't want the President of the United States to speak about these issues, we must solve them locally, and we are willing to do so. Also with regard to expropriation, the fact is Section 12.3 of the Expropriation Act, as well as Section 19.2, are in contravention of the South African Constitution. And those are the worrying things that are seen by the U.S. So if we want to make sure that we stop the friction, we must just address these issues. They are real issues.
All right, Kelly, because of time, we are going to wrap up shortly. With regards to, AfriForum and Solidarity considering leaving and going to the U.S., is there a consideration from you or anyone of who's a part of AfriForum or Solidarity to follow with the open door that President Trump has given to white Afrikaners?
Yes, no, our statement was quite clear already on the 9th of February. AfriForum and our colleagues in the Solidarity Movement held a media conference to say we appreciate the gesture of anybody that would want to help Afrikaners, and we respect those Afrikaners that would take on the opportunity. But for us, we want to build a future in Africa, and we are committed to this continent. Afrikaners are called after the continent. The language we speak, Afrikaans, is called after the continent. We can't be Afrikaners anywhere else. We are no longer Europeans. Dutch, German, French people came here, but the new people evolved. People that are African, that it's a new nation that was born out of various influences.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, I wish we could continue, but we have run out of time and are going to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you so much, Lulu. It was great speaking to you.
Thank you. That's Calais Creel, the AfriForum CEO, joining us on the line. It is 17 after 12 Central African time.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu on Channel Africa.
The Azanian People's Organization, AZAPO, has strongly condemned the recent migration of 49 white Afrikaners from South Africa to the United States, accusing them of fleeing accountability for past injustices and betraying their country. AZAPO is calling for these individuals to be stripped of their South African citizenship, labeling them enemies of the state. And to unpack this further, we are joined on the line by Jabu Rakwena, AZAPO's Secretary for Publicity and Information. Jabu, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Luli, and thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, what specific constitutional provisions or laws does AZAPO rely on to justify revoking the citizenship of individuals who leave the country and make claims deemed outrageous by the organization?
Lulu, I would have loved to engage Kali on certain issues that he raised. However, it is our position as AZAPO that the citizenship is not an absolute right. It's a right that is subjected to several things. One of those being owing allegiance to the country to which you are a citizen, and being subjecting yourself to the rules and the rule of law within that particular country. You've asked Kali a very specific question, which he avoided deliberately so, to say, what measures did you do to correct the impression that is created in Trump's administration? I mean, we've seen yesterday when the 49 were welcomed in America, the same narrative is still being pursued, that they are being persecuted, that they are suffering as a result of the conduct of the government of South Africa. Yet no tangible evidence can be presented to that effect to say there are those kind of situations. Now, coming back to your question, it is our submission that if, I cannot just jump into the plane and land in America and say I want to be the citizen of that country. I need to apply and I need to meet certain requirements that they have. So our position is by the conduct of them leaving the country and under the narrative that they are leaving the country, that to us is they are revoking their citizenship. And when they revoke their citizenship, they will be treated like any other foreigner when they come back and want to re-enter the country and be citizens of this country again. We are not saying that government or South Africa is the one that is chasing them away, that is taking away their citizenship. They, on their own, they revoke their citizenship by saying we renounce our allegiance to South Africa, and we renounce our obligation to be the citizens of this country in terms of being liable for tax, being liable for the rule of law and so on. We are taking up allegiance from the USA. By the way, they don't meet the requirements of refugees. If you look at the requirements of what a refugee is in terms of the status of the United Nations Convention. And by that fact, the contradiction in terms is the fact that America is chasing away those that qualify and meet the requirements and the definition of refugees, and yet they are accepting the Afrikaners. By the way, there are black farmers in South Africa, and they suffer the same fate in terms of being victims of crime, just like white farmers are suffering, just like you and I are suffering. I mean, we take measures, you and I, to see to it that we protect ourselves. We put trackers in our vehicles. We put burglar guards in our houses because we are victims of crime, and we try to minimize the risk. Now, what is so special about Afrikaners that they deem themselves to be defined outside the parameters of that narrative that is there in the country.
Now, Jabu, doesn't AZAPO's rhetoric risk perpetuating a narrative of intolerance in South Africa, potentially alienating citizens who feel targeted? And how does this align with democratic values? Because we don't know. It might be 6 months later, some of those 49 people wanting to return to South Africa. So how does this then work?
No. We're not saying that if they want to come back, they should not come back on the basis that they are still citizens of the country. They can come back on the basis that they are foreigners who are applying for citizenship in the country, and they will be treated as such in terms of whether they meet the requirements of the law of being citizens. You see, the challenge with dual citizenship is they are given the right to vote by virtue of the fact that they hold dual citizenship. And we are the ones facing the brunt of crime in this country. We are the ones who are dealing with the situation and making sure that we address the challenges and the problems that we have. And they want to have their cake and eat it. They want to go and sit cozy in the U.S. and at the same time dictate to us what kind of government we should elect in this country by being given the right to vote. So we're saying they should not be entitled to that. If they decide on their own without us pushing them, because there's nothing that pushes them out of this country. In fact, if you look at what Kali is referring to in the Expropriation Act, that act, if you compare it to the old Expropriation Act that was promulgated by the apartheid government, there's nothing that is different except cosmetic changes in relation to then there were no provinces, now there are provinces, so they take the initiative in terms of being having the powers to deal with expropriation. And this expropriation, we as WhatsApp, we don't agree with it. But it is the law, and the expropriation says there must be compensation. And if you are not happy with the compensation, it allows you to go to court and go and challenge it. So what is so undemocratic about it? What is so unconstitutional about that particular aspect? So it is clear that the narrative is being pushed by white supremacists who want to go through the back door to return to the old way of doing things in this country. And we're not going to allow it as a We're saying enough is enough. Those who want to go, we're not going to push them out of the country. But if they want to go, let them go. But they should not expect to still remain the citizens of this country.
Jabu, what message does Azapo convey to young white South Africans who reject racism but may feel unfairly vilified by association? How does the organization distinguish between racists and those born into post-apartheid South Africa?
You know, if you looked at the pictures that were flighted yesterday, among those there were very young white South Africans, some of whom were born into democracy. So what issues do they have with this country? I mean, there are 40% of youth in this country that is unemployed, and the majority of those are black South Africans. And they are patiently waiting for government to come up with solutions. They are not taking up arms, or they are not revoking their citizenship to say, we are tired of this government, it's not serving our benefits. Black people have been patient for 30 years, Lulu. And for 30 years, we have been told through the administration of Mandela that things can be resolved through peaceful negotiations. What is so difficult about AfriForum engaging in peaceful negotiations? What is so difficult about Afrikaners? I mean, we cannot allow a situation wherein we don't address the imbalances of the past and we want to brush them off the table. Black people's patience will soon run out because they cannot be kept with the promise that there's a better life for them, which they cannot see. We need to. What is so difficult about white people sharing in the wealth of this country? What is so difficult about them sharing the land of this country? I mean, over 80% of the land is still in their hands. And they are pushing that we should concentrate on the land that is in state hands. And most of that land is not arable. You cannot do anything about it. It's mountains, it's land without any rainfall and so on.
Yeah.
We need to be having access to the rich arable land so that we can also be involved in the trade of agriculture, so that we can also be involved in many other trades that are provided by this country.
Yeah. Well, Jabu, we have run out of time and are going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That's Jabu Rakwena, Azapo's Secretary for Publicity and Information, joining us on the line. It is 25 after 12.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
South Sudan's authorities have yet to bring to justice those responsible for brutal and fatal attacks on civilians 3 years ago in southern Unity State. This is according to international rights groups, Human Rights Watch. The rights group says between February and May 2022, county officials in Koch and Mayandit in Unity State, with the backing of government forces and local militia groups, carried out a series of systemic and coordinated attacks on civilians and civilian property in opposition-controlled territories, mainly in Lear and in parts of Koch and Mayandit. Our Nyagoa Tutpur is the South Sudan researcher in the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch, and she now joins us on the line. Nyagoa, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Now, take us through the events that occurred in February and May 2022, very briefly, in Koch and Mayandit Unity State. What exactly happened during that period?
Right. And following the signing of a peace deal in 2018 and the creation of a unity government, pending the restructuring of security sectors in most of South Sudan, this is the backdrop of this conflict. The conflict started as a dispute for territorial control between Koch and Mayandit commissioners who are allied with President Kiir and the SPLA-IO who are allied with Machar. And following the territorial dispute, it started with an attack on a garrison or a base that belongs to the SPLA-IO and villages and markets around that area. And then after that spread into Lair County, where civilians affiliated who are assumed, because this is the ethnic group that Riek Machar comes from, are assumed to be affiliated with him and the IO. Multiple villages were attacked. Much of Lair County was attacked and civilians displaced. Now, I was in Lair in both May and July investigating these abuses, and what I saw, massive burning of civilian homes, looting and destruction, including of cows, basically everything. And the violence happened just 3 years after massive flooding affected the area, leading to a lot of food insecurity and hunger. Now, the kinds of abuses we saw at that point, the killings, the rapes, the gang rapes, the attack on humanitarian facilities, including looting of warehouses belonging to WFP, the World Food Programme, the destruction of health clinics. All this bore, hallmarks of scorched earth tactics that have also been documented by the UN, including the UN Commission on Human Rights and the UN mission in South Sudan. All these are war crimes and could also amount to crimes against humanity. Now, since that time, 3 years ago, there has been no justice for those abuses. And so while it may seem that this is old news, this is an open wound, and it continues to fester because victims are still waiting for justice and communities continue to be hurt and affected by what happened 3 years ago.
Now, government has established a commission of inquiry. They established a commission of inquiry in April 2022 to investigate the Lair violence, but its findings were never made public. Are you able to tell us more about that and what you know about the findings?
Now, what I understand is that the committee recommended that individuals that they implicated in their report be removed from power, from their positions, and that other issues around restructuring the security sector in Lair and ensuring rule of law takes place. So we understand that the committee made some of those recommendations, but I am not able to speak to their findings because their report is not made public. And this is not the first time that the government will often set up an investigation committee, not to ensure justice, but it kind of ends up stopping other processes that could take place, like the police investigating, like the judiciary, the public prosecutions launching investigations. And so this committees, if they're not allowed to publish their findings, or that their findings are not used in court processes to ensure criminal accountability for these very serious crimes, then justice does not reach its conclusion and they become window dressing.
What are you calling for as Human Rights Watch?
We're calling for accountability for individuals that were implicated by, in our research, by UN reporting, by ceasefire monitors, and even by the government's investigation report, which should be made public. Now, South Sudan is required under international law to ensure justice and redress for these kinds of serious crimes. One of the processes that has been proposed by the peace agreement is a hybrid court, a court that is comprising South Sudanese judges and international judges, including African judges, to try the most serious crimes that have taken place in South Sudan since 2013. And this court, we're calling for the establishment of this court without delay. And we're also calling on President Kiir to ensure, because this, while we're talking about this, there are other abuses taking place in the country, and these have been driven by impunity. And so while we talk about what has happened 3 years ago, today, the government still attacks civilians, including through aerial bombardments. And President Kiir has to ensure that these attacks against civilians end. And this kind of impunity we have seen year in, year out comes to an end. And it starts by ensuring criminal accountability.
Nyagoa, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for today.
Thank you.
That's Nyagoa Tutpoor, a South Sudan researcher in the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch, joining us on the line. Our news headlines up next with Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Armed clashes erupted yesterday evening and gunfire has echoed in the city centre and other parts of the Libyan capital, Tripoli. This follows reports that an armed group leader, Abdul Ghani Kirkli, known as Ganawi, was killed. Zimbabwean police have arrested 6 members of the Zimbabwe National Students' Union for protesting at the University of Zimbabwe over lectures' low salaries. And South Africa's international relations expert, Professor Bheki Mngomezulu, says he is concerned for President Cyril Ramaphosa ahead of his meeting with the United States counterpart Donald Trump. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has confirmed that he will be meeting the SA delegation led by President Ramaphosa next week. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Well, thank you, Onele. And we say good afternoon to Msibudi Makura with our sports update.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. We'll start here. Andy Murray will no longer be working as Novak Djokovic's coach. The decision, said to be a mutual agreement, means Murray will not be Djokovic's coach and will not be by his side when he chases an 8th Wimbledon title in July of this year. So Djokovic, a 24-time Grand Slam champion, joined forces with Murray in November of last year. Under Murray, the Serbian reached the semi-finals of the Australian Open, ultimately also retiring injured after losing the first set. The 37-year-old has had a difficult season by his high standards, losing his first match in 4 of his 5 past tournaments, as well as being beaten in the Miami Open final by 19-year-old Jakub Meninsk. Meanwhile, world number 1 tennis player Aryna Sabalenka got through a dramatic tie-break set to get past Marta Kosiak 6-1 and 7-6 in 2 hours and 5 minutes on Capo Central, completing the quarterfinal lineup at the Italian Open. After routine first set for the Sabalenka as well as Kosiak put on a thrilling display in the second set. Sabalenka fought back from 5-3 down before edging out her opponent as well as increasing her head-to-head to 4-love. Sabalenka stayed strong when facing break points, also stopping the match from getting more difficult. She saved the first 12 break points before Kosiak finally took her 13th chance. Her opponent then led 5-3 and served for the second set, but her lead didn't last too long as Sabalenka broke back basically and winning the game without losing a point and kept the set going. She moves into the quarterfinals of the ongoing the Italian Open rather. On to some rugby news. The Springboks are scheduled to play a home test match in the Eastern Cape at the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium in Gqeberha. This on the 12th of July. This will also be the second test of the series against Italy, and the first test will be held in Tshwane a week earlier on the 5th of July. This also marks the first time the Springboks have played in the Eastern Cape province since 2021, although those games were behind closed doors due to the global COVID-19 pandemic. South African Rugby Union President Mark Alexander says this is homecoming as well as a squad celebration. They're quite excited for this first test match in Gqeberha for the first time since 2021.
This is more than just a match. It is a homecoming for the sport, a tribute to the players who have risen through the ranks here, and an opportunity to inspire future generations. We're looking forward to an unforgettable test match and to celebrate the incredible rugby spirit that the Eastern Cape embodies. So we're happy to be back in the region.
On to some cricket news now. The Indian Premier League will resume on the 17th of May after being suspended because of hostilities between India as well as Pakistan. The world's biggest franchise league was halted for 1 week on Friday but will recommence following the brokering of a ceasefire last Saturday. So the final was initially set to take place on the 25th of May and has now been pushed back to the 3rd of June, meaning the end of the IPL will clash with England's white ball series against the West Indies. The Pakistan Super League, also known as the PSL, will also has now rather been moved. So it was initially moved to the United Arab Emirates and now postponed indefinitely, and is also making plans for a reschedule and also to reschedule its final 8 matches. The England as well as the Wales Cricket Board initially agreed to let any players taking part to remain for the entire competition, meaning all-rounder Jacob Bethel is not in the squad for the once-off test match against Zimbabwe. And finally, Italian Carlo Ancelotti, one of the most decorated managers in world football, will become Brazil head coach this after leaving Real Madrid at the end of the season, with the Brazilian Football Association having confirmed the news on Monday after finally landing his their first choice candidate. Now, the 65-year-old Ancelotti has enjoyed 4 hugely successful years in his second tenure at the Spanish Giants, but they are now set to finish the season without a trophy. He is said to be replaced by former Real Madrid midfielder Xabi Alonso, with sources close to the 43-year-old former Spain international saying he has agreed a 2-year deal with an option to extend it by an extra year. Brazilian soccer sources also said Ancelotti will sign a 1-year deal to become the world's highest paid national team coach ahead of the 2026 World Cup, with an option to extend his contract. Real have yet to announce Ancelotti's departure. The Brazilian Football Association's announcement confirms a hugely anticipated move, ending a saga that has rambled on for quite some time. That's a wrap from the sports desk at this hour. For any sports stories you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu Di Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Annie Kalonji sur Channel Africa.
Nous étions en train de savourer la chanson Démocratie.
Démocratie.
Ça veut dire quoi?
Démocratie, déjà, ça dérive de démocratie, qui est le régime dans lequel nous sommes, dans notre pays. Mais je plutôt pensé que nous sommes plutôt dans une démocratie.
Pourquoi?
Où il y a une cruauté tellement... une méchanceté des dirigeants envers la population. En fait, dans cette chanson, je suis en train de blâmer tout le monde. Je blâme et les dirigeants, qui pour moi sont des démocrates.
Oh, je suis maintenant en train de comprendre. Donc, démocratie. Oh!
Annie Kalonji, tous les dimanches sur Mix Vibration.
Well, thank you to Msibudi Makura with our sports update, and we say good afternoon to Chanduko Ligege with our business news.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. South Africa's unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point to 32.9% in the first quarter of 2025. Data by Stats SA shows that there was an increase of 237,000 in the number of unemployed people to 8.2 million. Meanwhile, the expanded unemployment rate increased by 1.2 percentage points to 43.1% in the first quarter. At a provincial level, the Northwest Province recorded the highest expanded unemployment rate at 56%. South Africa's Deputy Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Bernice Swartz, officially opened the Global Land Degradation Neutrality Integrated Land Use Planning Inception Phase 2 workshop this morning in Sandton, north of Johannesburg. The event forms part of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification's Global Land Degradation and Neutrality Target Setting Program. It has brought together delegates from participating countries, international donors, partners, and UN agencies to address critical issues surrounding desertification, land degradation, and drought. Deputy Minister Swart explains.
And I think that this workshop becomes important here because this workshop follows us coming from COP16 in Saudi Arabia. And it also follows us as South Africa really taking it into our stride that our communities at the grassroots level, because that is where people are struggling with land to produce food, that is where people are struggling with a drought.
South Africa's Deputy President Paul Mashatile and Minister of Tourism Patricia de Lille have officially opened the 2025 edition of Africa's Travel Indaba at the Inkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Center in Durban, South Africa. The three-day event, which kickstarts today, is attended by thousands of delegates and exhibitors from across the globe. Addressing the opening, Mashatile called on Africa to unite and to take advantage of the tourism sector as the backbone of the continent's economy.
We must foster innovation and sustainable practices to ensure long-term economic growth. Let us celebrate the bond that unites Africa, honoring the vibrant cultures, breathtaking landscapes, and the incredible people that make this continent shine with brilliance.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the African Continental Free Trade Area is a key economic driver for growth on the continent. Ramaphosa was speaking at the Africa CEO Forum 2025 underway in Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan. Heads of state, chief executive officers of leading African and global companies, visionary entrepreneurs, investors, and change makers from across the continent and beyond have converged at this summit. Ramaphosa elaborates.
The Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a fundamentally transformative mechanism that was adopted by the leaders of the continent. And we should recognize and applaud the fact that the political leaders under the aegis of the AU saw wisdom, and led by President Issoufou, and President Kagame was leading the reform process. They saw wisdom in scaling the fortunes of Africa up.
U.S. President Donald Trump has arrived in Saudi Arabia for his first major tour of the Middle East region since his re-election. The U.S. President will also visit Qatar and the UAE. He hopes to be able to secure deals worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The BBC's Lise Dossett has more.
President Trump has again given to Riyadh the honor of his first stop on his first official tour, just like in 2017. But this time it's a very different region and in some ways a different president. The main focus here is going to be not on the politics but on deal making. Some very prominent business and tech leaders are coming with the American president. There's talk of investment in the US economy of $1 trillion and more. It's all about America first.
$1 in Nigeria is at 1,000 naira 604. In Botswana, 13 pula 44. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 435. Zambia, 26 kwacha 61. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 67, Russia 81 rubles 40, India 84 rupee 86, China 71 21, South Africa $1 is at 18 rand 26, $1 is at 75 pence to the British pound and 89 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at $3,252, platinum at $984 per ounce, the price of oil $64.78 a barrel. That is all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 117144459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Well, thank you to Chanduko Ligege with our business news. It is 12:46 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Join us in conversation on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook at Channel Africa, you can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763. That's 4069126. Hashtag Africa Update, and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +2711 714 4459.
Tune in and turn up the volume. This is Channel Africa. Africa Update on Channel Africa.
Our Zimbabwean police have arrested 6 members of the Zimbabwean National Students' Union for protesting at the University of Zimbabwe over lecturers' low salaries. Our university lecturers are demanding a salary of $2,250, the amount they received in 2018, arguing that their current amount of $219 salary is inadequate. Their absence from classes due to this dispute prompted the student protest against the university administration. More from our correspondent in Harare, Zimbabwe, that's John Kasim.
Initially, the singing and chanting in the students' common room seemed harmless. However, the chilly Monday morning escalated into clashes between agitated university students, members of the Zimbabwe National Students' Union, and the police. This protest resulted in the arrest of 6 student leaders who organized the demonstration. The students' demands were straightforward. They wanted the University of Zimbabwe administration to reinstate 2018 lecturer salaries of $2,250. Lecturers had previously staged their own protest, leading to the arrest of their lawyer and union leaders. They have since stopped teaching and impacting students. The students' Monday protest stemmed from the fact that without the 2018 salary, lecturers would not return to work, and subsequently students would not be able to take their examinations. Here is what the students said during the protest.
We are here as University of Zimbabwe students to demonstrate against the administration of Professor Paul Mafumo and the Registrar Dr. Munyarazi Madambi, who are denying us the right to quality education. As students, we paid full tuition fees, and after paying full tuition fees, we expect learning services in return, and that includes lecturers teaching us in lecture rooms. But as you all know that our lecturers are on strike, they are being underpaid, they are being paid slave wages, $229 for a lecturer, a professor, a doctor. But the solution is very simple. Pay our lecturers pre-2018 salaries of $2,250 United States dollars, and they will be back in lecture rooms.
A few days ago, University of Zimbabwe lecturers downed tools demanding a review of their salaries from the current $219 to $2,250. They said the current salary has incapacitated them to an extent that they are no longer able to board buses to work. Previously, lecturers were employed by universities until recently when government took over. This is when the salaries were changed, rendering their wages useless, they say. While the protest and arrest of students was meant for authorities to act, chances this situation will remain for a long time are great. Here's what the student said.
But the administration of Professor Paul Mafumo and Registrar Dr. Mnyarazi Madambi are trying to act as if everything is normal, of which nothing is normal. It cannot be business as usual at the University of Zimbabwe. So the students are saying we need our lecturers back, bring back our lecturers, and the solution is very simple. Pay our lecturers, compensate them fairly, pay them decent salaries, decent wages.
John Kasim in Harare, Zimbabwe for Channel Africa News.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu on Channel Africa.
It is 12:52 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. The African continent has become more resilient regarding food security. This is according to South Africa's Agriculture Minister John Steenhuisen, who recently addressed the Nutrition for Growth Summit in Paris in France. A critical issue affecting Africa is one that remains largely overlooked: the cold chain infrastructure. And to tackle this, cooling as a service, CAS is emerging as a game-changing solution, enabling manufacturers and farmers to access cleaner, more efficient cooling systems without the high upfront costs. And to tell us more about this, we are joined on the line by Samuel Jacobs, Head of Business Development Refrigeration at Energy Partners. Samuel, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, the main talk of the town was the loss of aid funding recently by the United States. However, there are things that Africa can do to ensure that it works towards becoming more resilient, with one such being the cold chain infrastructure. Why has this been overlooked for so long?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it forms part of the mindset that in Africa the problems are so convoluted that nobody wants to unpack it, and I think it just got piled up with all the other problems, infrastructure problems, and then it just got piled up in there. But I think if we start digging into it, we see that the story requires a lot of attention. I think the cold storage infrastructure in South Africa, we are fortunate. We've got about 10 cubic meters of cold storage available for every 1,000 urban residents. And I think we're only second to Egypt on the continent. From there, the numbers drop down to like below 1. There is just not infrastructure in place continentally. And I think if you engage in conversation, then people resign to the fact that no, well, in Africa we eat produce fresh, we slaughter the chicken now, we eat it now, we don't have a requirement for cold storage. And I think it's a misnomer. It's not the reality. It doesn't address infrastructure problems that we are facing on the continent. I think there's been a lot of effort from development finance institutions that have built multiple projects on the continent to build cold storage infrastructure for communities to actually access that infrastructure. But DFIs have got limited budgets, as we all know. And what that does, as some other experts notice, it creates what's called the graveyard of cold storage, which is what Africa is beginning to get known as, because there's little pockets of developments that happens and it can't be sustained. And so you build a cold store, it dilapidates after X amount of years because there just wasn't sufficient finance to actually sustain it over time. So I think it's ignorance, to be said. It's a lack of understanding what the realities are on the ground.
And how would the cold chain infrastructure assist in addressing food security on the continent?
Well, I think firstly, we have to first preserve what we've got. And I think that's the essence for me of where you start off with food security for a continent. You've got produce, you get a bounty from nature, and you want to preserve that bounty as much as you can. And so what you have is you say, well, with what we've got, how can we take the infrastructure and deploy it such that we can store and distribute our bounty efficiently to as many people as we possibly can. So what it requires is investment. It requires investment in cold storage infrastructure, not just investment in power, not just investment in logistics, which is where the main focus lies when we talk about investment in infrastructure. You need those two components. You can't have cold storage without logistics, and you can't have cold storage without power, but you need to also directly invest into cold storage infrastructure. And what that does, it's at a simple terms, it helps the farmer to keep his product on the shelf at the retail for longer, which means he gets a better price, and somebody has got access to that nutrition immediately.
Now, another problem the continent is facing, besides the cutting back of food aid, is the dismantling of Power Africa. How does this impact the continent?
Yeah, it's big. As I said, power is critical for refrigeration infrastructure, for industrial cooling infrastructure. Industrial cooling is an intensive exercise. It uses a lot of energy. But again, there's ways to get around this in terms of how do we invest in the natural resources that we have. We've got a massive amount of natural resources in hydro, in solar, and those are waiting to be deployed for cold storage infrastructure. So I think how we can overcome that problem is to say, let's not just allocate capital at a broad level to say, like, we need to invest into infrastructure. You need to drill down and say, how much are you going to allocate to roads? How much are you going to allocate to electricity, and how much are you going to allocate to power generation for cold storage? So I think with the program being dismantled, I think it's an opportunity for us to realign our thinking around how do we put finance to work for cold storage infrastructure, for power specifically for cold storage infrastructure. We've done some developments where we put solar panels on cold stores, and we run boiler applications and a refrigeration system in what we call a three-way system. So we have got cooling, we do cooling on the one side, heating on the other side, and we generate power on the other side. All three of those components talk to one another, giving the customer the most efficient energy per kilowatt. So I think the dismantling of that program is devastating, but it's also an opportunity for us to redirect our attention to cold storage infrastructure power.
Well, Samuel, I wish we had more time. We have run out of time and are going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
No problem. Thank you.
That's Samuel Jacobs, the Head of Business Development Refrigeration at Energy Partners, joining us on the line. And we say good afternoon and a happy Tuesday to the Upside team. And it's Tebohole Kuleni. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. As always, I come to studio with a glistening glow. This is a glow of happiness, is what it is.
Which is always good.
Always. So what's coming up on the show this afternoon? Johannesburg this weekend will be descended upon by 50 medical volunteers from Operation Smile, and they will descend upon the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital to perform 40 life-changing cleft surgeries for free. And that's going to be quite the conversation. I'm very excited about that one. And then we get into conversation with South African publisher Imaginary House, who has just bagged the prestigious Bologna prize for best children's publisher in Africa. Wow. Fun conversations and amazing banter between myself and Nompumelelo as always.
All this and more coming up at the top of the hour on The Upside with Tebohole Kuleni and Nompumelelo Ngubeni. For myself, Lulu Gabu and the Africa Update team, it's been a great day. Continue with us on our socials, and we will do this again tomorrow. Thank you to our team, as our producer Tracy Bumgard, our technical operator Katu Madava, and social media Elaine Bengani. And from us, it's goodbye. Let's do this again tomorrow.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Clashes erupted yesterday and gunfire has echoed in the city.